Welcome. What a wonderful room of energy and love. I love it. It is truly a joy and an honor to greet you on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, our arts and culture team, BPL Presents, and this newly imagined entity, BPL's Center for Brooklyn History. My name is Marcia Eli. Since January, we have been working with Rosa and Ben, Barbara Ehrenreich's children, to put together an evening that looks back at Barbara's legacy and forward towards carrying that legacy into the future. It feels especially fitting to host this program here at Brooklyn Public Library's Center for Brooklyn History, as our mission is to tell the history, the stories of our past in order to inform change today. This room is full of people who knew and loved Barbara, as well as a public shaped by her work. My hope is that we all leave inspired to follow her footsteps, each in our own ways. Now it is my pleasure to welcome tonight's MC, Alissa Quart, Executive Director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, the nonprofit which Barbara founded. Alissa.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here tonight. I want to thank Jakob and Marcia and Linda Johnson, who's the president of the library, Brooklyn Public Library, Center for Brooklyn History, Ben and Rosa, and all the incredible friends of Barbara we have coming up tonight, including Cornel West and Bernie Sanders. Okay. Today we're here to discuss the luminous life of our dear friend and colleague, Barbara Ehrenreich, a little more than a year after she left the human plane. She was the greatest literary representative of the working class that America saw. She embodied what I think of as the lyrical left, or the imaginative and slightly anarchist strand of progressive thinking and activism that started in the 1970s. Woohoo! I said, woohoo! Lyrical left. For me personally, she was an adolescent inspiration and a close collaborator and friend with whom I created the large effort of her third act, the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. And you can check it out. We have a little write-up at the end of the piece, the piece of paper you have. This was a nonprofit that she came up with after the 2008 recession gutted our profession. Barbara, who I met a decade ago, was not typical of great journalists of her generation. Instead, her writing and her very being expanded the meaning of media accountability long before the downsides of both sidesism were discussed. As she once said, "I have never seen a conflict between journalism and activism. As a journalist, I search for the truth, but as a moral person, I am obliged to do something about it." I also just loved her. She was someone I could talk to about abortion, Florida, and literature. Only one of the things on this list is actually bad for you, and it starts with an F. She was someone I could gossip with and seek wild advice from. Should I get a mammogram? Don't bother. Should I teach my 5-year-old something to read? Try Mao. True story. I can still hear her voice whenever some cruel or absurd news event occurred or when anyone in our mutual orbit acted out of character. Alissa, I can't believe it, can you? Her actions and her beliefs almost always matched, which is an alignment unusual for idealists and people of strong virtue. For instance, she had greater respect for people who couldn't pay their rent, reporters who couldn't pay their rent, than the most famous television news anchors of the land. We had a very uncomfortable meeting once with one of them. Did not smile, stone face. Oh, I'd love to interview you on a major TV network, stone face. I'm not sure she'd go to maybe in cheap diners where she'd get a cup of black coffee and give a $10 tip. Her own relationship to her celebrity was kind of happy that it made her more effective, but also sort of disdainful about its actual value. I often wonder what she would think of the year that just transpired. What would she think about the Burning Man, rich people in the mud? This is a very Barbara Ehrenreich topic, right? Burning Man, rich people, mud. Billionaires on a submarine, dying, okay. Oh, too soon. ChatGPT performing shadow work on our phones, or the rise of Vivek, the first AI presidential candidate. She would also have been thrilled with Frances and Bernie and the rest coming to talk about her legacy tonight, and that all of you, the audience, are still engaging with her work. And I really want everybody to continue to do that. How could she be gone? That she left us as we approached Labor Day would seem fitting, though given her penchant for myth-busting, she would probably roll her eyes at the notion of a news hook. She would say something like, "News pegs are products of the Hallmark industrial complex, Alissa." I thought she was deathless. She was still self-improving. When she was ill, she was doing things like, back exercises and watching the TV show Vikings, true story, total fan. She snickered over the phone with her friends, drank martinis, and read serious as hell sociology, even as her health declined. In one of her books, she called the fact that we live a short time on Earth the situation. Her full awareness of mortality was the force behind her political urgency, her taste for scathing jokes, the recognition that life shouldn't be wasted. Everyone's life shouldn't be wasted. And that's right? She looked at individual death as part of a saga of social struggle. The situation, she wrote, led her to wonder, what is the point of our brief existence? She got as close as anyone to finding out. Welcome to an incredible night in her honor.
My parents always said, always ask why. Always ask the next question. Never be satisfied with thinking that what everybody else believes is true. An article on octopuses. I would say curiosity and rage drive me. Those are the two things. Rage, that's pretty easy to explain. Yeah, certainly in our present circumstances in the United States. And the other is, I have to admit, is curiosity. I want to know what is going on, what's happening. And that can be with something entirely unrelated to everything else I'm involved with. I still can become obsessed by a question. I set out to be a writer. It just sort of crept up, and then I was filling out my income tax form, and I said that was my occupation.
Freelance writer.
Yes. One of my granddaughters, a couple of years ago when she was only 5, turned to me in a car seat, and said, "Grandma, why are we alive?" And I go, whoa, there it is. I'll get back to you on that. I'm working on that. I think many people, especially when you're younger, not always, these questions come up. It's not that unusual. I think what is more unusual is that I didn't ever totally grow up. We're supposed to put those things behind us at a certain age. All those big questions. We're supposed to say, okay, I accept it. I'm going to go out there and earn a living, it never went away. But I grew up in a time of great turmoil and social conflict. It was the war in Vietnam. It was the civil rights movement. It was so much going on, and I took a side. I don't know how you could not take a side. I took a side. I threw in my lot, so to speak, with the underdogs of the world, the fellow underdogs. And, that's what I continue to do. So, very big lesson, which just has resounded in my mind ever since. I never use the word unskilled to describe anybody's job. Every job takes intelligence and skill and concentration and deserves our full respect. And if there's, you know, if there's any job you're thinking, oh no, that couldn't be, try it. Try it for a few days. Women do not change institutions just by assimilating into them. But, and here's the but on which all my hopes hinge, a certain kind of woman can still do that. We need a kind of woman who can say no. Not just to the date rapist or the overly persistent boyfriend or whatever, but to the corporate or military hierarchy in which she finds herself. And we need a kind of woman who isn't trying to assimilate, but who is trying to infiltrate and subvert the institutions she goes out into. Now, when you say this, somebody is bound to say, but aren't you talking class warfare? Isn't this class warfare? Damn straight. That's what it is. But I did not start this war. You did not start this war. The other side did when they decided we could live on less and less while paying more and more for everything. And it is time we fought back.
Let me swim, let me swim, let me swim, let me swim into the coast. Breathe easy. Let me swim, let me swim, let me swim, let me swim into the coast. Breathe easy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words commemorating Barbara Ehrenreich, who was clearly one of the most important American writers in recent history. I don't have to tell anyone who is viewing this that for decades, Barbara has been an extraordinary voice in support and defense of the American working class. And unlike many, many other writers, Barbara was not afraid to name names. She spelled out and described in great detail the barbarity of poverty, what poverty does to people. She talked at great length about corporate exploitation and extreme wealth inequality. And her book, Nickel and Dimed, I think, is a classic that will be remembered for a very, very long time. Barbara gave definition to class dynamics in significant ways through her investigative work that will continue to serve as an invaluable tool for us to build a more equitable world for future generations. Barbara was very clear. She said loudly and with great clearness what the people of America's working class have been saying for a very, very long time. And that is that human suffering anywhere and everywhere caused by oppression is wrong, and that we must all stand together and root it out wherever we find it. Barbara stood up for unions and for worker protections because she knew that unions are absolutely necessary to rein in extreme corporate greed. Barbara stood up for the rights of women and fought against racism because she knew an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Barbara stood up for environmental justice and against the atrocities of war because she knew that if we are going to tackle the climate crisis, we must see the common good in the humanity of all people. The United States alone is not going to do it. We need the entire planet on board. So during a time of rising right-wing extremism and the growth of oligarchy in this country, we should hold close and remember the lessons of justice, compassion, and solidarity that Barbara has equipped us with. We can and must guarantee economic, social, racial, and environmental justice for every American and for generations to come. I remember, on a personal note, Barbara visiting me in Vermont. We did an event together. This is decades ago. And I will not forget, we went into a small town called Bristol, Vermont. And at the end of the town, there was this rather dilapidated bar. And we kind of walked in there. I like doing that, saying hello to people. Barbara walked in with me. As soon as we walked in the door, somebody said, "Barbara Ehrenreich." Kind of cracked me up because I thought I was better known in Vermont than Barbara was, but on that occasion, apparently not. But once again, thank you all for coming together. Barbara was a treasure and a good friend to many of us, and we will not forget her. Thank you all very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce Billy Talon, otherwise known as Reverend Billy, and the Stop Shopping Choir. Woohoo! One second. Billy is not ordained by a traditional church, but he's a believer in the potential of anti-consumerism, of using song to reach people. Barbara was ordained as one of his saints.
Amen. The Stop Shopping Choir. It was easy to talk with Barbara. It was very easy to talk and listen with Barbara Ehrenreich, because listening was as material as talking in the process of conversing with her. But when I talked to her, something would happen through steps. You know, we hear her strong, heroic voice, and we need that. In a conversation with a subject for her books, in a conversation with a, hoping for affirmation, insecure artist like myself, she would take the conversation into an area of the commons voice, what I call the commons voice. She would ask you not to be afraid, and she would have the obvious example of her own lack of fear. She would also jettison, like her style of writing, no style was anywhere in sight. She would come down to expressing with her words just something rising up in her body and coming from her. And then you would do a duet with her and do that back. And the two of you would have available then all your memories, all your experiences were available to just vibrate up through your body to each other and have this kind of conversation where sometimes I wouldn't even remember what we talked about. It would come to me a day or two later, like a dream that comes back. That kind of trust that Barbara had in just sourcing humanity and not having a clear prejudice, a careerist accent, something from a motive, anything that was underway that would change one of the listeners in the conversation. None of that, but just being there together, speaking and listening together. That was her commons that she believed in. And she heard that when strangers would start a conversation in a commons like a bodega or just standing on a dock looking out at the ocean, or the traditional commons of a park. Or Barbara loved that. Barbara loved it when people were being people, when they were free to be people with one another. And when you have that trust, and you can go into that green space in the center of town, that traditional commons, and you can just share something about your life with a stranger who shares back, well then, you're taking a radical political position in a totalitarian consumer society. And that's what she was doing in her quiet way, in her indefatigable way, in that way that was so strong. She was inviting you to a kind of pleasure, physical pleasure. And now, she's with us in this room. And she didn't want a memorial. You can imagine that, right? You can hear her saying, I don't want a memorial. So let's call this a celebration. Barbara-luia! Barbara-luia! We celebrate you, Barbara, because you took us on these flights of memory and talk and chosen delectable memory. Thank you. Thank you for the courage you taught us to be people. And may we find a way to get that center back again now. Because the center's not holding now. And it's because we don't trust each other to just talk and listen anymore. We're always cultivating this distance. We're on Twitter. We're labeling each other. Labels upon labels upon labels. No! Let's welcome each other. Just to share. Just to share. Just to be humans. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. Barbara-luia. All right now. I'm shaking, I'm shaking, I'm shaking, I'm shaking. Come on. Come on now. Barbara-luia! Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. Barbara-luia! Woo! Come on. Come on. Come on. Hey. Barbara-luia. Hey. Barbara-luia. Yeah. Come on. We can grow change. We can grow change. Barbara-luia. Woo!
We can grow.
Come on now. Come on now. Change, change. And we can change. Barbara-luia. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thanks to the Brooklyn Historical Society for hosting this event. My name is Frances Fox Piven. You're probably wondering, I'm 90 years old. And Barbara and I were friends for about half a century. We were, in a way, in the same trade. The stuff we worked with was words. We talked, we wrote. Barbara's books were better than mine, but we both did the same kind of thing. And we did a lot of it together, some of it on the phone. Sometimes we collaborated, but we talked about our work all the time. And Barbara was smart, but you know that. But she was not only smart, she was so funny. So funny. Isn't that why we love to come and hear Barbara talk? I don't quite know how to express the tricks in her ways of talking that made it so hilarious. She was sarcastic, always at the expense of the rich and the powerful. Her barbs always hit home, and it was such a relief when they did, because we could just relax and laugh at those idiots. And there was a moment to do that. It was fun. It was fun, and Barbara gave us that fun. But there was more than that. Barbara had, I think, two qualities which distinguished her from other people who were smart and sarcastic at the expense of the rich and the powerful. One was that she was very brave, very courageous. You could see that in so many little ways. Barbara had breast cancer at one point in time, and I don't know how many of you know this, but there's a kind of paraphernalia that goes along with having breast cancer, sympathizing with breast cancer victims, thinking about breast cancer. The paraphernalia is pink, satin, plush, pillowy, and Barbara hated it. Hated it with every ounce of her being. But she wasn't afraid of talking about breast cancer, understanding it, trying to think through the various palliatives or cures about breast cancer. Her courage also showed itself in other ways. We all know that her most popular book is Nickel and Dime. Well, think about that venture. It was not just writing a book. Barbara decided, and she was well into middle age when she decided this, because it's different when you're a young person. She decided that she would live the life of a low-wage, middle-aged woman. A woman who now confronted a tightened welfare state under Clinton. To do that, she created a protocol. In order to become that woman, she had to deny herself certain things and do it strictly. She had to not deny herself a hairdresser, a doctor, certain kinds of food, the comfort of a big house. She wanted to actually become that woman and live with every fiber of her being the life of that woman. That's not easy. Not only because you give up the comforts of middle class or upper middle class life, but it's not easy also because you have to, well, in a way, pretend. You have to go through the tension, the trouble of becoming somebody else, of living another kind of life. She did that. And she did it even though it sometimes involved being afraid. I was talking earlier this evening with a number of you about, I think this was in midsummer, Barbara, as part of her plan for living the life of a low-wage working woman, Barbara was now in Minnesota. Now, Barbara had, for a number of years, come to spend part of the summer with me, because I lived in upstate New York, and she lived in Key West, in Sugarloaf Key. In the summer, upstate New York is better. So she came, so we spent a lot of time together, and when she went to Minnesota to work as a fast food waitress, she called me from time, every day practically. And one night she was staying in a cheap motel on the ground floor, and she opened the windows because there was no air conditioning. And there were voices in the parking lot, men, loud, brawling men. And she became alarmed because there was nothing between her and the parking lot but the screen. So she sent the notes she had made on her day's work to me on her computer by email, because she was afraid that they would break in and take the computer. Well, becoming another person for a short time, a person without the protections of familiarity, without the comforts that you're used to, all that's hard. And Barbara was determined to do it. And she was brave enough to do it, even when she was afraid. Well, one other thing about Barbara. You know, we think of people who are political heroes, heroines, and I think Barbara is, for me at least, Barbara is a model. I want to be like her. We think of people like that as sort of proletarian armies with banners marching across the wintry steppes, stuff like that. But I think that there's another dimension to a democratic socialist political morality, and that dimension should be called not so much marching in banners and proletarians, but kindness. Kindness to those who have less, to those who are disabled, kindness to those who are weak. Barbara's most remarkable quality was that she noticed people, and she noticed people who needed help, and she was kind. I think in this terrible time in our country and our world, as we try to figure out what to do, how to be, how to live, how to survive, just us and our friends and our family and our comrades, Barbara should be our model. Thank you.
What a blessing and what a privilege to stand here before you and talk about my very, very, very dear sister, Barbara Ehrenreich. My God, my God, my God. And to follow the one and only Frances Fox Piven. Let's give it up again, my friend. We have precious memories arguing in that National Committee, Democratic Socialists of America, with Michael Harrington and Stanley Aronowitz and Bogdan Dinage and Paulette Pierce and others. You remember that, Sister Fran? You remember those days? Ooh, I'm telling you. But you're so very right. There's something that was always so sweet about the spirit of Sister Barbara Ehrenreich. I think in so many ways she is unique in the history of men and women of letters, unique in the annals of public intellectuals in the history of the American empire, because she fuses the prophetic and the comic. That's very, very rare. Saul Bellow was a great comic writer. He's one of the great novelists of ideas. I don't associate him with the prophetic. Love you, Saul. There's a whole lot of prophetic folk who have a hypersensitivity to the suffering of others, who have unbelievable empathy to be able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, as was noted in that classic, you see. But they don't have that rich sense of incongruity and ambiguity. They don't have a sense of embracing the absurd and transfiguring that wrestling with the darkness and nothingness into a witness that is in solidarity with the wretched of the earth, in the language of Frantz Fanon. How rare it is, even in literature. Got my dear brother Peter Brooks here. He understands what I'm talking about, as do all of you all. Tobias Smollett's of the world, who confuse deep empathy with a sense of the comic. How rare it is. Eudora Welty had it, Chekhov had it. We Americans, hard to find it. But go to Butte, Montana, and keep track of a towering sister, a towering intellectual, a towering force for good, a towering freedom fighter, a towering wounded healer, a towering revolutionary. I want to use that language because she was a revolutionary at the deepest level, beginning at home. Just look in the eyes and see the sparkle. Brother Ben and Sister Rosa. That's the pouring of love, deep compassion into their souls, and they manifest it so that part of her afterlife will always be manifest in the lives of Sister Rosa and Brother Ben. And then our lives as well. I was telling my beloved wife, Professor Hannah Madavi West. I said, oh, if you had a chance to meet Sister Barbara, good God Almighty, exemplar of integrity, which reminds me in many ways of a kind of an answer to Du Bois's four great questions. When he says, what does it look like to be a revolutionary in the American empire? As F.O. Matheson used to say, an empire that moved from perceived innocence to corruption without a mediating stage of maturity. Still have the best and the worst, but integrity in the face of oppression, honesty in the face of deception, decency in the face of attack, and courage in the face of brute force. Integrity, honesty, decency, courage, that's old school virtues. At the very moment when the professional managerial class, let us be very clear, the first essay ever read by her was in Radical America's 1977, with she and John's canonical text, professional managerial class, the PMC. Everybody talks about it now. That was social scientific breakthroughs. She fused the analytical and the lyrical with that smile and the style that she had from Butte, Montana. Degree in physics from Reed College, PhD, Rockefeller University in biology. What is it about this sister from Butte, Montana? Her genius, not just in terms of being an isolated individual who wrote and had a vocation and deep calling of writing, but what the Russians call geniality, that largeness of mind, largeness of soul, largeness of heart, and largeness of laughter. Oh, yes, reminds me of Emma Goldberg, doesn't it? Emma Goldman. I don't want a revolution where I can't dance. I think she had in mind a little break dancing, too. Why? Because Barbara Ehrenreich's, her scholarship, her writing, her journalism, her lyricism were words dancing on the page, but as you cut those sentences and they bleed, as Emerson says, the best of the history of American letters. Cut her sentences and they bleed. Because unlike most economists concerned about the statistics, there's precious human beings down there who are wrestling with social misery, dealing with asymmetric relations of power at the workplace, and yet at the same time, they have their own structures of feeling and structures of value as they move from mama's womb to tomb. Yes. That's the humanistic sensitivity of our dear sister Barbara. That is so very, very rare. And that's why we are here, because we'll never, ever, ever forget her. Unpretentious, down to earth, still so sophisticated, still so mature in soul, still surrendering herself to solidarity, but always preserving her intellectual integrity as a free thinker. I mean, we don't have time to talk. I guess the panel's going to talk about her magisterial corpus, right? The positive thinking and the pseudo-optimism tied to a market-driven society and so forth. So much there. So much to be examined, and at the same time, what a magnificent gift to us. Sister Fran knew a towering figure named Fannie Lou Hamer. Nobody like Fannie Lou Hamer. She used to sing a song in my black church tradition. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. You remember that, Sister Fran? Ooh, she would sing that song right at the very moment when it looked as if there was no way out. It looked as if Tina was hegemonic. There is no alternative. There's no way of trying to provide some imagination, vision, some infrastructures and institutions that could provide some opposition, some counter-hegemonic forces against the present. You understand that, my dear brother? I see him right there. Oh, love you there, man. Well, let me tell you this. When I was growing up on the chocolate side of Sacramento with the Black Panther Party next door, and we singing in the church, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. Barbara Ehrenreich, in her deep, profound, secular sensitivities, left so much heaven behind because she kept track of the humanity of people, the humando, those headed toward burial. And in the short time that they had, she could keep not just the justice, because Niebuhr is right, any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. Justice was not a market strategy for her. It was something deeper than justice. Tenderness, kindness is what love looks like interpersonal and in personal life. And she fused that care and tenderness and sweetness and kindness that Sister Fran was talking about in her social justice work. And we need that more than ever. And it's just beautiful to see this place packed for Sister Barbara. Let us give it up for Sister Barbara Ehrenreich. We love you, Barbara. We love you. We shall never, ever forget.
Wow. Thank you, Cornel. That was amazing. Thank you, Francis. This is like Mount Rushmore DSA style. Or we just think of it as Mount Rushmore in this room. Next, we have a panel of 3 of Barbara's friends discussing Barbara's legacy and the future of her political and literary self and output. They include Tom Lewandowski, Janet McIntosh, and Matthew Desmond, all in a conversation with the New Yorker's Jia Tolentino. Let's give them a hand.
Are we on? Yep. Well, it is such an honor to be here with the 3 of you, to be here in the presence of legends, in the company of Barbara's family, to celebrate the life and the work of this incredible woman. I had the privilege of interviewing Barbara in her last public interview just before the pandemic started and then just afterward. And I hate to think of people as icons, but Barbara she is the icon. She's a hero for the way that she modeled throughout her entire body of work a kind of consistency without stagnation that can only come from the rarest kind of commitment towards the cause of making this world better and more humane. This commitment that was intellectual and emotional and interpersonal and spiritual, something that is the definition of authentic. And I always think about the last thing that she said to me in that interview. And I'd asked her what it was like to make an unignorable argument over and over and then document at the same time our failure to listen to it. And she said, the idea is not that we would win in our lives and that would be the measure of us, but that we will die trying. That's all I can say. And that spirit has been surging in this year of strikes and labor actions. Let me shout out my own union, the WGA, and all the other unions that stood in support during the strike. That spirit is one of the most powerful parts of Barbara's legacy, and I'm so glad to be here to speak to Janet and Tom and Matt about that legacy and how all of us might carry it on. Janet, I wanted to start by asking you about, you mentioned something upstairs about the field notes that Barbara had sent you from writing Nickel and Dime. She said something great about toilets. I wonder if you could just...
That's a fine place to begin.
Yeah.
Yes, so Barbara, I knew Barbara from the sort of mid-90s, and I worked as her research assistant intermittently, and we exchanged ideas, and she just liked to converse. And sometimes she needed a little bit of help with technology, as Rosa can attest. So she was doing her field work, actually working in Maine as part of the work for Nickel and Dimed. And she sent me an email, this was in 1999, and said, I'm having trouble with this computer. I've rented a computer. I think the A drive isn't working properly, and so I'm just going to email you this chunk of my journal, my field notes. And you're welcome to read them, tell me what you think, but whatever you do, guard them with your life. And so I'm not sure why she didn't just put them into the cloud somewhere and know that they were done with, but she wanted me to actually print them out and keep them for her. So I was reading them, and one of the things, I was rereading them recently, and one of the things I noticed was they were beautifully written and so exquisite that she had actually been able to cut and paste entire chunks of the raw text and publish them in Nickel and Dimed. But she was a little bit more tart and unforgiving, I guess, in her field notes about her employers when she was working as a maid. So she was writing about scrubbing toilets and with all kinds of really absolutely disgusting stuff about bodily excrescences and so forth. And she said, I'm starting to think of them as soilers rather than homeowners. And then she said something really blue that didn't go into Nickel and Dimed.
She said, fuck them all.
She said, fuck them all.
I just love that. Okay, so I wanted to, Tom, my next question is for you. You co-founded the Workers Project, an organization in Indiana that does this extraordinary thing of bringing together union workers, non-union workers. It's sort of it extends solidarity far and wide in the community, including to the unemployed and the undocumented. And so you've been working at the center of one of Barbara's great critical and practical inquiries, which is how do we direct our solidarity? And how does it so often come to be misdirected? Upward to the powerful, where it certainly doesn't need to be, or how does it come to be withdrawn? And how when you are working to extend it outwards to those with fewer protections, how do we do this? And I wonder if you can talk about this great project and her work and how it intersects with yours.
Well, first of all, how we came to know Barbara in Indiana. Okay. How we came to know Barbara. Nope. This one work? Okay. I have Barbara's technology issues. I didn't know that Barbara existed in 2004. And there was someone from the university in Fort Wayne who they had just booked Barbara to come speak. And so when she came, she was coming to speak here in Fort Wayne. And so I was told by this person from the university, you should get to know her. It's kind of a matchmaking thing. And I thought, oh, sure, a writer that could really talk about workers. Well, we checked her out. We went, looked up some of the articles she'd written, one that she'd written with Tom Gagan on the 10 things that unions should do, and we looked at them, our board looked at them and saw some of these things are good, some of them are bad, but all of them should be talked about. So we decided, we'll find her, let's talk to her. So we tracked her down through the tax records in Florida, and I called to Sugarloaf Key, found the landline. Somebody answered, I assume one of Ben's friends, because they sounded guilty. And I got her phone number. I called her and said, you're coming to Fort Wayne in a few weeks, and you're going to speak at the university, and we would, afterwards, they have no plans for you, we would like to exploit you. And she said, sure. So I picked her up at the airport then, and we just talked about what this was going to, why we would be working together. And she said, with this, what America needs is a workers' movement like the civil rights movement. And I said in good improvisational style that yes, and it needs to be community-based. And from that very first meeting, we decided we were going to work on that forever. So it's a matter of not just representing workers where they work, but where they pay taxes, where they live, meaning our communities, the world, and society. And to do that with the kind of solidarity that I think is, we understand solidarity as caring about and for each other. It is that kindness that Francis talked about and Cornel talked about. That's what came through so much. So it's a matter of doing that. I'm not answering, expansively your question, but I think it's important to understand that it starts with that understanding of solidarity, of caring about and for each other. From there, you can take it a lot of places.
Well, I think that speaks to the centrality of something as simple as kindness. Maybe it does all come down to that, and its moral and ethical dimensions, right? So I wanted to ask Matt about, both of your recent books, Evicted and Poverty by America. They're such monumental works, and they're important to me for many reasons. But one of the things that they do is something that I had always admired in Barbara's work, which is you know, in America, as we all know, there's this default of thinking that prosperity is the norm and poverty is deviant, right? And that, and as a result of that, all of these things become invisible. The fact that, you know, the economy depends on worker exploitation, and the fact that the psychological degradation induced by this stage of capitalism is sort of essential to this stage of capitalism's functioning. All these things, the simple fact of dominance comes to look invisible and inevitable. But in Barbara's work and in yours, you make people understand that it's anything but. In fact, it was created, and it was created for this purpose, and it's shocking. It's always shocking. And because it has been created, it can then be unmade. I wonder if you can talk about that aspect in your work and hers.
I got it working. I think management was trying to shut you down. Yeah. I quote this line from the novelist Tommy Orange in my book, where he writes, these kids are jumping out of the windows of burning buildings, falling to their deaths, and we think the problem is that they're jumping. And when I read that, I was like, damn, that's the American poverty debate. You know, for over 100 years, we've been focused on the jumpers, and we have asked questions about their work ethic and their families and their connection to the job market. Barbara focused on the fire, you know, who lit it, who's warming their hands by it. And I think that's a huge lesson for us. John Kenneth Galbraith once wrote, complexity is a refuge of the powerful. And I think when Barbara was writing, she had the ability to cut through all the abstractions and the insipid justifications for why things are the way they are, and just be like, it's exploitation. You know, when she reviewed Evicted in the Times, which is basically why I have a career, she said that I soft-pedaled eviction a little bit, she's a soft-pedaled exploitation a little bit. She was like, Desmond gingerly brings it up at the end of the book. I was like, fair point. She put it front and center. And I think part of this means that we have to start rejecting all absolving theories of poverty. Theories of poverty that blame whoever else, the other political party, that one uncle, you know, and start really taking personal responsibility and political responsibility for the fact that America is the richest nation in the history of the world with double the child poverty rate of other advanced democracies.
I think we'll end up returning to that exact subject, but I wanted to, Janet, and I don't just want to ask you about toilets. So I wanted to ask you about, like, another thing that's really notable to me about Barbara's body of work is, you know, as consistent as her commitment was to documenting exploitation, issues of labor and poverty, her interests were so wide-ranging, right? She wrote books about war and joy. She wrote a novel. She wrote a memoir about her experiences of God and faith, which I loved. And, you know, I wonder if you can speak to this other aspect of her work and these other manifestations of this legendary curiosity. And, you know, I hadn't read many of these books until I was prepping to interview her in 2020, and they seem to me ultimately so connected to her work about labor and solidarity, right? They're working through these questions of what turns us outward to each other versus what turns us inward on ourselves. And yeah, I'd love it if you can talk about those books and also just more about what it was like being her research assistant.
Yes, quite right. I think she had this incredible curiosity about the human condition and human nature, and it was all connected to her political concerns about what conditions elicit the best of humanity and help people to work together in solidarity. Why and how and when do people end up, going to war with one another and dwelling in isolation and sort of post-late capitalist narcissism? She was really interested in these sweeping questions, and her curiosity was, she was not encumbered by loyalty to any academic discipline, so that was one place where I came in, was I could go and sort of gobble things from history and archaeology and psychology and so forth, and she would bravely pull the threads through. And it's very hard to do that in academia. It's hard to do that when you're subject to peer review. She was delightfully free of that. She would be peer reviewed after the book came out. It was too late to do anything about it. So she could be bold. She would take these big, bold swings and see if she could look for patterns in, perhaps she could make a claim about, for instance, the evolution of the human capacity for joyful, ecstatic communion together, and make a guess about the conditions under which that evolved, a guess about the conditions under which the tendency to war evolved. And she was working on a book about narcissism, and she was starting in the Paleolithic. She actually wrote a beautiful essay that she published a few years ago, and it was the foundation of this narcissism project, and she was looking at these exquisite cave paintings that ancient humans had made, and they would draw these megafauna down to the whisker. They were so attentive to the fauna, but then they never drew human faces. They would draw stick figures who were sort of acting goofy and looking a little incompetent, and she wondered whether, maybe narcissism and a fixation on the individual just wasn't being culturally encouraged in the Paleolithic, and what were the conditions over time that gave rise to the hyper-narcissism of our current moment. Yeah.
So I want to just talk in general, like open this up to talk about Barbara's affect, all of these things that were so particular to her and the way that she approached the world and the way all of these qualities of hers that came out in her writing that define it, right? Like upstairs we were talking about just an absolute lack of sanctimony. Quite rare. And not even a willingness that it seemed there was this aspect that it seemed that she couldn't not see the person on the other side of the page or, of the meeting table as absolutely equal to hers, as smart as her, with much to teach her, this other quality that's often absent in writing of this sort. And, they're these things, they're the hallmarks, the righteous anger, the absolute refusal to adopt, contemporary forms of mandatory optimism and, any form of polite deference to anyone that we oughtn't to be to be deferential to. And I wonder if we could just talk about these signatures of hers and what any of you have taken from them and how they manifested maybe in your. I see you.
Sure. Yeah, Janet and I have talked. Well, time to time we talk because Barbara. Well, first of all, Barbara was a great organizer, and she brought people together as she has today. This is mandatory to have some kind of event for Barbara because this is organizing, and she may not want wanted to be memorialized, but she would have wanted an organizing event where we start doing more and more, and so we have been doing that to some degree, and Janet, she told me a couple months ago about a term that you had come to embrace called sancties, and
short for sanctimony.
Yeah, we were it's the problems of people particularly on the left, getting very sanctimonious, very morally superior about what they're doing, not focusing on the real humanity of things, and again, not really caring about people. And I think that it's one of the shortcomings, it's frustrating shortcoming in the discourse that we usually get into, is about how I can be morally superior. It's like, just get over it.
She couldn't bear that in the academy, too. I think when I first met her, one of the things we talked about in our first conversation in 1996 was she was feeling pretty miffed by the postmodern turn. And for a number of reasons. And one had to do with the sense of being morally judged if you wanted to ask a question about human universals the way that she did. I mean, there were other reasons too. She worried about this model of, it's all social construction and just a partial narrative all the way down. And then, well, where is the truth and the reality that you're fighting for if it's social construction all the way down? She was the first one to say science, sorry, I'm going on a slightly different track here, but that science has been powerfully influenced by partiality and bias, and she and Deirdre English wrote about that in Women's Reproductive Health and the Science of That decades ago. At the same time, she felt that the cure for bad science is better science and not postmodernism. So there were epistemological problems she had with postmodernism, but she also had a problem with just the tone that saturated so much of academia and a lot of liberal discourse as well, where there was a lot of point scoring or sometimes in the academy jargon that's kind of willfully obscurantist and designed partly to make other people feel less than. I think for her writing clearly and lucidly was a political act, as well as it was a gift to the reader at many levels, but it was a political act.
Tom, you were saying that Barb was a great organizer, and I want to just ask you about that. I mean, one thing, like in her work, there is such a sense of it's such a clear-eyed map of failure, and then this ocean of possibility. It was like those two things felt connected, that the errors in the past and the possibility of the future. And I wonder if you can, tell us more about what made her such a good organizer.
Well, she was relentless. I mean, she went everywhere she could. She would speak everywhere. She even come to Indiana 3 times, so that's remarkable in itself. And she just understood that this was, you're going to be mad about things. You should be angry. And what are you going to do about it? You have an obligation to do something about it. Once you see it, say it, what are you going to do about it? And she did a great job of helping us do that. Just having her come to Indiana to say, we are seen in society, that we matter too. Just that act was really important. And I know she had this odd feeling to her celebrity, but it was a tool for organizing. And she understood that, and she swallowed it and did it. So one of the things in organizing that was very clear, and I talked to Gary about this a lot, is that the traditional labor movement is absolutely essential. Those lessons and traditions and cultures are absolutely necessary. Many of them have been corrupted, but it's completely insufficient. We have to come up with new models of organizing where people are at. We have to think about this very differently. And that was certainly what, the fearlessness of her intellectual curiosity. We talk about organizing as sort of the laboratory of history. You just go out there, you try it, you experiment with it. And so we would often talk about ways we could do it, like with unemployed and anxiously employed. How can we organize unemployed workers if they're no longer paying dues? Does the union care about them? But should they? Yeah, well, so we came up with strategies. We worked through that stuff. It's just a matter, if we listen to workers as she did, nobody was a better representative of workers than she was. If you listen to workers and say, okay, what are the problems? Can we do something about this? Let's think this through. And it's that kind of intellectual curiosity to let's figure out a better way. And we've got folks to test it on. They're either going to get behind it or not.
Yeah, well, I think this, it speaks this, what you were both saying about our impatience with, what was it, the sancties? Mm-hmm. with the sancties and with the snarls, the discursive snarls of academia or, of even just, popular intellectual discourse, whatever that may be right now. She had an organizer's understanding of the way that, we can talk as much as we want, but we can write as much as we want, but the places where things are worked out, they're in physical rooms, and they are with people who are discontent and people who are slogging through these actual minute changes to organizations and to policies that actually open the path up for what we're looking for, right? Her impatience with talk and with writing itself, I think, is a great gift. That's something that I have felt as a great gift to me. I wanted to ask Matt about, another thing that I loved so much about your latest book is it contains a lot of self-indictment. Another thing that I thought Barbara was incredible at. She had no hesitation to identify failures whenever she saw them, including those in her own life or in her own, in her own history. Like she was not at all afraid to be like, that effort failed. And it was, like you were saying, the laboratory of history. It was just, we tried X thing, it didn't work. I'm doing X thing, I ought to be doing better at that. And, your book, it contains, much of it is about how, many, those of us who might find ourselves on the comfortable left often blame poverty on, as conceive of poverty as something that is caused exclusively, let's say, by conservatives who don't want to expand the social safety net, right? When an argument that glosses over the ways that I, just using myself as an example, you or I might benefit that we do benefit enormously from exploitation, from the exploitation of low-wage labor in farms and in factories and in care labor, from the mortgage interest deduction, all of these things, right? And that aspect of just kind of clear self-indictment in order to move past it seemed very central to that book. And I wonder how you see that step, that acknowledgement, playing into the situation we find ourselves in now and the solutions we have to look forward to in terms of, either our individual volition or the collective work in front of us.
I think one of the most heartbreaking things that has happened in recent history is for about 2 years, we had a different country in COVID. Usually our poverty reduction normally is like Paraguay's. That we do okay. We do Paraguay level. In COVID, we look more like Germany. Usually our welfare state looks more like Brazil's. In COVID, we look more like Norway. We were able to cut child poverty by 46% in 6 months. 6 months. We reduced evictions to the lowest they've ever been on record, ever, even after the moratorium ended. For scores and scores of Americans, COVID was a breath. It was a time out of poverty. And then we just let it go. And I think that on some score, the answer is really simple why we let it go. There was a certain senator that didn't really like the big things. It was temporary. But I think when you poke at those answers, they really fall apart. When don't we have large political challenges? Temporary things have fundamentally re-altered the country. World War II is temporary. It gave us the New Deal. And so I think that at the end of the day, we have to face the cold, hard fact that we didn't do enough. We didn't. We were silent. We didn't call our congressperson. We weren't in the streets. We weren't demanding this as a new normal. And part of that is because I think we, especially folks in this room, we are really good at critique. we can critique all day long. But we're kind of bumbling in the language of promise and that next thing. And that's something we have to take responsibility for, and not just point to all the things we can point to, but also point to the fact that when we have another chance, when it rolls around again, let's not be so silent. Let's bind ourselves in solidarity with the poor.
Or as you put it in the book, right? The term poverty abolitionist, right? That it's an active, that it's a commitment to that horizon of possibility that is so not often even admitted as one, right? So we are coming to the close of our 30 minutes, which I knew would happen incredibly too quickly. We haven't touched even a corner of all the things that we could sit here and talk about from Barbara herself and her work. But the last thing, that I would love to hear you guys talk about. I mean, we're here to talk about the way that her work can extend into the future, the way that her ethos and the things that she practiced, the way that she approached the world. How do we see that extending into the way that we organize, into the way that we write, into the conflicts and the commitments to come? Matt, you just kind of answered that question, but what are we taking from her life and her work, and what can we all take forward?
So for me, Barbara made herself accountable to people that were not like her. And I think that is for us, Jia, for writers and people that are trying to bear witness to all this suffering in America, I think that is like an essential thing we have to do. Like, our audience has to include folks below the line. I gave a book talk in Princeton, where I work, and the first question after the book talk was this woman. She stands up and she says, "I volunteer in Trenton," which is like a loaded thing. I don't know what the New York equivalent would be, but it's like, I volunteer in the poor area. And we give tutoring to all these kids, and shouldn't we tutor the single moms? First question. So I look out in the audience and I see my friend Vanessa Sullivan, who's a single mom in Trenton. And so I was accountable to her. I knew I had to answer that question in a way that affirmed and recognized her. And I think Barbara's work demands that kind of accountability that I think we should demand from our pundits and our writers and our thought leaders today.
I think that organizing is continuing. I mean, that kind of pact that we made back in 2004 to work on that. Since the lockdown phase has ended, the pandemic and the passing of Barbara, we've been doubling down on creating communities of solidarity, and how we can make that happen. And we're heartened by the fact that there are other places that are doing similar things, not because it's new, but because it's the oldest way to organize, and that all the institutional ways have failed us. So, but it is starting up and this is okay. Let's start it over again. And so there are people from other communities who say, let's just start something here. And it's not only Fort Wayne, it's now Toledo. It's there are people in other cities that want to do this, and we feel this is an extension of what Barbara wanted. And anyway, it's just what we have to do.
I'm thinking about her last big effort to write about narcissism, and I think one of the things about this moment of late capitalist pillage and extreme individualism and hyper narcissism is that other people become less and less real to you the more you're encouraged to be a narcissist. And one of the great things about the classic Nickel and Dimed was that it was, I think for a lot of readers, this kind of a duck turned into a rabbit when they read that book, because the person who was scrubbing their floors or serving them food or suddenly became real through Barbara's voice, and became not only a person who's maybe struggling and suffering, but a person who's potentially really sharp and might even be laughing at you as well for your own foibles. This was, and you know, if nothing else, the narcissist does not like to be laughed at. But I think it was a moment to make people really check themselves and remember the reality, like just the ontological reality of all these other spheres of experience in humanity, and to take that so much more seriously than it's been taken. And of course, the political implications are vast. So.
Well, unfortunately, that's time. But thank you guys so much, and thank you guys for having us here.
Yeah.
Hello, we're Barbara's kids. I've been sitting here thinking a lot about how she would have reacted to this if she were here, because she kind of was here and is here. And I know she would be complaining mercilessly and grumbling constantly, and she would have described it as an absolute torment for her to sit through this, but she would have loved it, and she would love to see you all. This is Nina, her grandson. Her granddaughter. It's been for me a night, obviously, I think you can imagine, of complicated emotions, but I've been extremely happy to see many of my own friends and family who I don't see nearly often enough, and to see my mother's friends, her chosen family, many of whom I've barely seen at all in recent decades. But I might be happiest of all to see out there the faces that I've never seen before. Those of you who may have never met my mother in person or met her only briefly and didn't know her except through her writing, but who found something there that mattered to you and that moved you. And I'm happy because that means that she is still alive in you, in your laughter, in your curiosity, in your rage, in your sadness, in your determination to change the things that desperately need changing. To borrow a phrase from one of her essays, revolutionaries in the cause of life. I miss her every day, but it does me a lot of good to know that she is alive in your hearts too, and that she's alive here today with us in this room. So thank you. Barbaluya. We also wanted to thank Marcia for making this happen. Since my mother's death, Rose and I have known we wanted to do something for a bigger public, and there were various points along the way where we didn't know that it was going to happen. And really the second we met Marcia, it became clear it was going to happen, and she made it happen. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody here at the Center for Brooklyn History who both visibly and invisibly made tonight come together. Thanks to Jakob and to the Brooklyn Public Library for all their support. Thanks to all the speakers, some of whom who traveled a long way to be here. Thanks to Reverend Billy and Savitri and the choir. You brought her to life here today. A huge thanks as well. We haven't met them yet, but to the caterers, the cooks, and the servers who will be working the reception, which you should all be sure to stick around for as soon as this ends.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything Ben said. It means so much to us to have you all here with us today. And so many of you here have been important parts of my life, of Ben's life, of all of our lives, and most importantly of her life. So thank you. Do you want to say anything? And that too. But no, we're so grateful, and we're so grateful to the staff here, to Marcia, to the people who've been moving furniture around for us and doing the sound and doing the video and setting things up. And every piece of this took lots and lots of people, and all of the people who came and spoke came from so far away. Only other things I would say, one of the qualities that I cherished most about my mother, she had a funny quality of simultaneously taking yourself very seriously and not very seriously at all at the same time, and insisting that everybody do the same. And what I mean by that is by taking yourself seriously, you know, she never thought, oh, well, no one will listen to me, there's really no point in doing this, or, well, I'm going to lose anyway, or it's too hard. She always thought, it is so important that I speak, and she always thought it was so important that you speak, and you speak, and you speak, and that everybody spoke. She never met anybody who she didn't think, no, you need to say something, you're important. She never let anybody get away with saying, but it's too hard, but I don't matter, but who will care, but we'll never win this battle. She always said, you matter. I matter so much. You matter so much. Every single person in this room, and all the people who aren't here, and all the people who are out there, every single one of you matters so much. And none of us get to say, oh, not me, somebody else will. You know, we all must be the ones who speak, who fight, who act. And so she took herself incredibly seriously in that sense, but at the same time, as I think many of you who knew her personally saw many times, she refused to take herself that seriously. She hated it when people got pompous and self-righteous and sanctimonious. She couldn't stand it. She didn't want it for herself. If you tried to compliment her, she'd immediately make a self-deprecating joke. If you tried to say that somebody else was perfect and wonderful, or some idea was perfect and wonderful or untouchable, she would make a joke about that, because she didn't want any of us to start taking ourselves too seriously. She wanted all of us to keep that openness to doubt, to skepticism, to uncertainty, and most of all, to humor. And I think that's the one thing that would bother her today as she looked around the world. Two things would bother her. One, she'd say, where's the kindness? Because she cared very much about being kind, just treating people as people, whoever they were, but also about having a good time and having a sense of humor, and always finding the silliness around us, because there is silliness all around us all the time. Thank goodness there is silliness all around us all the time. So go out there, fight, take yourself seriously. Don't lose your sense of humor. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. We're so happy that you're here. We hope that you will join us at the reception. And there's also a couple of guest books sitting on a table out there, and I hope you'll take a moment to scribble a limerick or whatever happens to cross your mind. And I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you, friends and family. Thank you, everybody, for helping put this together. And go out and have a drink and laugh together. That's what she would want. Laugh and fight. Thank you.
they can both turn on us. When we get completely engorged by ourselves, we, you know, it's all vanity. It's all, you know, me, me, me. And it's very hard to face death if that's what you're like.
Right.
You have, I think, I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm going to say Buddhist sounding thing, I think. You have to lose yourself. Lose yourself in your work, in your art, in the movements that consume you. And then death becomes kind of incidental. Because consider, you know, I consider my long involvement in the women's movement and movements for economic justice. When I'm gone, they're going to go on. Other people will do things I've been doing or do them better. So that's good. It's not scary. It's wonderful. But what I want to say is, what are you living for? What, you know, why do you really, are you really concerned about whether you get to be 94 or 96? You know, what is this about? You know, what are we doing? What is our purpose? You know, and each of us has a different purpose. But I certainly have a lot of things to do, and I want to do them. But I'm also eager to pass them on to younger people. And I'm doing that, actually, in my life.
But the connection is, for me, as I said, so, you know, a lot of this, you know, talk about positive thinking and the happiness industry and so on, it seems to me, you know, having kind of immersed myself for so long in the stuff about collective joy, just to speak to the absence of real joy in our lives. When people have to scratch their heads and ponder, am I happy enough, etc., it shows. We've forgotten what real fun is like. Now, I would like to see a lot more revivals of collective joy, you know, in all forms, occasions in which individuals can both display their special individual talents and simultaneously create this wonderful sense of community and bondedness that we get through these kinds of events. All right, I want everybody to samba or chip their way out of this room. Good night.